Ladies and gentlemen, once a righteous man lost his wife and raised his daughter alone. He fed her halal, taught her the Quran, and made dua daily. Years passed. She grew sick. Doctors failed. He cried to Allah and to Hajjat, "Ya Rahman, spare her." But her soul returned to its Lord. He wept, yet said, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." That night, he dreamt of her in Jannah, smiling. Patience brings reward. Allah never forgets the broken-hearted. The power of patience and faith in Allah is among the most profound qualities that a believer can possess. In times of immense hardship, especially during the loss of a loved one, it is this very patience, sabr, that distinguishes a heart grounded in faith from one overwhelmed by despair. In the story of the father and his daughter, we witness a reflection of deep Islamic principles that echo throughout the Quran and the Sunnah. A man, left to raise his daughter alone after the death of his wife, shoulders a responsibility that demands emotional strength, spiritual resilience, and unwavering trust in the decree of Allah. From her infancy to her final breath, he nurtures her with a love and mercy encouraged by the Prophet Muhammad superscripto, who said, "He is not one of us who does not show mercy to our young." Termi. He teaches her the Quran, not just as a ritual, but as a living guide. He ensures every morsel she consumes is from whole learnings, knowing well that sustenance affects the purity of the heart. He raises her not for this dunya alone, but for the akhirah, planting the seeds of faith in her soul, hoping one day they bloom into righteousness. But Allah, in His infinite wisdom, tests those whom He loves. As the daughter falls ill, the father is not just tested with her health, but with the fear of loss or the pain of separation from the dearest part of his soul. He does not rush to blame fate, nor curse the days, but instead turns to the one in whose hands all affairs lie. He performs the hajjat, standing alone in the stillness of night while others sleep, pouring his heart out to the one who never sleeps. He raises his hands and says, "Ya Rahman, Ya Shafi, cure her. If this is a trial, grant me the strength to bear it. If this is a gift in disguise, open my heart to recognize it." The nights pass, the illness worsens, the doctors give up hope, but the father, though his heart is breaking, continues to whisper words of hope. He does not let grief silence his remembrance of Allah. In those moments, he is not only a father, he becomes a servant of Allah clinging to divine mercy. He is the embodiment of the ayah, "And be patient, for indeed, Allah is with the patient." Quran 8:46. The believer is not promised a life free of sorrow, but he is promised that Allah is closer than his jugular vein. When his daughter's soul returns to its Lord, the father's heart trembles. The weight of sorrow sits heavy on his chest. But even in that moment, he utters the words that mark the true believer, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." Indeed, to Allah we belong and to Him we shall return. These words are not just a statement, they are a submission, an acceptance of Allah's will over our own. His tears fall, his hands tremble, yet his tongue remains wet with dhikr. He mourns, but he does not despair. He grieves, but he does not rebel. He remembers that the messenger of Allah superscripto himself wept at the loss of his son Ibrahim, and said, "The eyes shed tears, the heart is grieved, but we do not say anything except what pleases our Lord." In the solitude of that loss, he is gifted with a dream. In it, he sees his daughter radiant, joyful, free from pain, running in the gardens of Jannah. She turns to him and says, "Father, I am waiting." That dream is not just a comfort, it is a divine message. It is a reminder that this life is temporary, and the true reunion of souls happens not in this fleeting world, but in the eternal hereafter. That one glimpse into the unseen lifts the veil from his sorrow. He realizes that patience was never in vain, that every tear he shed in secret, every prayer he whispered in the dark, every moment he resisted complaining to people and instead turned to Allah, none of it was lost. Such patience is not weakness, it is the greatest form of strength. It is not passivity, it is active submission. It requires faith to see beyond the moment, to believe that Allah's plan is better even when it hurts. This patience is the hallmark of those who are promised the highest levels of reward. The Prophet superscripto said, "When the child of a servant dies, Allah asks his angels, 'Have you taken the soul of my servant's child?' They say, 'Yes.' Allah says, 'Did my servant praise me?' They say, yes. Allah then says, build for my servant a house in paradise and call it the house of praise. Termi, the father, in his sorrow, becomes a beacon for others. His story is shared, not to glorify grief, but to glorify how faith transforms grief. It is not the absence of sadness that makes a believer strong, but the presence of hope in Allah amidst that sadness. His story teaches that sabr is not only during calamity, but before and after it as well. His consistency in worship before the trial prepared his heart, his remembrance during the trial fortified it, and his gratitude after the trial elevated it. Through this, we learn that trials are not punishments but platforms where the soul is refined, where the heart is polished, and where the believer is raised in rank. The Father's example shows us that even in heartbreak, the believer finds a doorway to closeness with Allah, and that in trusting the divine plan, no sorrow is wasted and no prayer unheard. Divine reward for sincerity and righteousness is a truth deeply rooted in the teachings of Islam. It is a principle that manifests itself in the lives of those who seek Allah's pleasure with genuine hearts, regardless of the trials they face. In the story of the father and his daughter, the immense reward given to the father was not only in the form of his daughter's place in paradise, but also in the peace, assurance, and connection with Allah that came from his unwavering sincerity and his righteous way of life. This man, despite losing his wife and becoming a single parent, did not abandon his values or fall into despair. Rather, he remained firm upon the deen, living a life guided by the Quran and Sunnah. He raised his daughter with love, not merely emotional but spiritual, a love that guided her to the remembrance of Allah, to purity in action, and to awareness of the hereafter. His righteousness was not limited to acts seen by others. His sincerity was evident in the private moments no one else witnessed, either when he woke before dawn to make dua, when he recited Quran quietly in the night, when he provided for his daughter from her learnings even when times were hard. He never compromised his principles, because his ultimate goal was not success in this life, but nearness to Allah in the next. When the daughter fell ill, his tests increased, but with every hardship, his response remained one of faith. He never ceased praying, never turned his complaints to people, but to his Lord. His dua came from a place of complete sincerity. He knew that Allah alone controls life and death, and he knew that every breath his daughter took was a gift from the Most Merciful. In his tahajjud prayers, he poured out his grief, not as one blaming fate, but as one seeking mercy. He did not pray out of ritual, he prayed with hope, with longing, and with submission. That sincerity is what elevated his dua, even if the outcome was not what he had asked for. For in Islam, the value of a dua lies not only in what is received but in the connection it builds between the servant and his Creator. When his daughter returned to Allah, the father was shattered, yet he remained grateful. He praised Allah even in loss, and that praise was a sign of his deep understanding of Tawhid. He understood that this world is temporary, and true life begins in the hereafter. His righteousness was not broken by grief, but it was strengthened. This is the kind of faith that earns divine reward. The Prophet Muhammad superscripto said, "How wonderful is the affair of the believer, for his affairs are all good, and this applies to no one but the believer. If something good happens to him, he is thankful for it and that is good for him. If something bad happens to him, he bears it with patience and that is good for him." Muslim. The father embodied this hadith. His gratitude during ease and his patience during pain were both sincere acts of worship, and Allah does not allow such sincerity to go unrewarded. The dream he had after her death was not an ordinary dream. It was a comfort sent by Allah, a message from the unseen to reassure a grieving heart. In that dream, he saw his daughter in Jannah free of pain, smiling, full of light. She turned to him with joy, reminding him that the separation was temporary. This vision was not merely symbolic, it was a form of divine response, a reflection of the father's inner truth. Allah honored him with a glimpse of the reward that awaited his daughter and, by extension, himself. It was a reward not only for his tears, but for the purity of his actions and intentions. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes that sincerity and righteousness are the keys to divine reward. Allah says, "Indeed, the righteous will be in the midst of gardens and rivers, in a seat of honor near a sovereign." perfect in ability. Quran 54:54a-55. The man's righteousness was not in grand public gestures, but in the way he lived when no one else was watching. His actions were sincere because they were for Allah alone and not for praise, not for recognition, but for the pleasure of his Lord. In Islam, the sincerity of intention ikhlasa holds immense weight. A small deed done with sincerity is greater than a large deed done for show. The Prophet Idiasis middle.superscripto taught us, verily, Allah does not look at your appearance or wealth, but he looks at your hearts and actions. Muslim. This father's heart was filled with sincere love for Allah, sincere concern for his daughter Zakira, and sincere submission to divine decree. These qualities elevated him spiritually, even in the depths of grief. It is important to understand that Allah's reward is not always visible in this world. Sometimes, it comes in peace of mind. Sometimes, in acceptance and strength. And sometimes, as in this story, in dreams and visions that soothe the soul. But in all cases, divine reward for sincerity is guaranteed. The believer does not seek reward from people. He seeks it from Allah, who sees what the eyes cannot see and knows what the hearts conceal. The dream of his daughter in Jannah served as a sign from the unseen, a mercy to reassure him that all his efforts, prayers, and sacrifices were not in vain. This is a reminder to all believers that no act of righteousness goes unnoticed by Allah. The pain endured for his sake, the patience held during trial, the dua whispered with the trembling voice, all of it is written with honor. The man's story is a living example of Allah's promise in the Quran. As for those who say, our Lord is Allah, and then remain steadfast, the angels will descend upon them, saying, do not fear and do not grieve but receive good tidings of paradise, which you were promised. Quran 41 hours 30 minutes. His sincerity in raising his daughter, in turning to Allah during hardship, in accepting divine decree, all led to this reward. And this reward is not isolated, it is part of a much greater promise from Allah to those who live with truth in their hearts and righteousness in their actions.